Good morning, friends. We resume our continuous reading of the book of Esther. We're starting chapter 6 this morning. Let's pull up the big picture here. So, 10 chapters, chapter 6. It means we are halfway through this book. And we are at an interesting moment. The big picture here. You see chapter 6 labeled as the story pivots, and I'll zoom in on that in just a moment, but let's just keep in mind for a moment how this is pivoted. There's been this decree to annihilate all of the Jews made by Haman. Esther and Mordecai have had this exchange back and forth. Esther has prayed and fasted. The whole Jewish community in the capital city of Susa has joined her in fasting and prayers. She has approached the king, and the king has received her favorably. She has, at the king's invitation to share what her wish is, had held a banquet for the king, for Haman, and for herself. And at that banquet, she has, when asked what her wish and request is, she has asked that they come to a second banquet. We're in between those two banquets now. That'll be in chapter 7. Chapter 6, things are going to start to shift. The story pivots. Oh, it pivots. Around the characters of Haman and Mordecai, this story pivots greatly, profoundly. Good morning, Linda. Good morning, Mom. Chapter 6, verse 1. I will mostly be reading from the left-hand column, which is the Common Jewish Bible. Remember, there are those moments where the Greek version of Esther has additional pieces that are not in the Hebrew edition. The Greek edition is in the right-hand column, Common English Bible. For the most part, I'm going to use the Common English Bible, which is a Christian Bible, to remind myself and us of what some things are that don't sound familiar in a Jewish Bible, because Jewish biblical language and Christian biblical language don't always match up. Sometimes the spelling is all that seems a little odd, but it sounds the same. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it's just not even close. There will be moments where that we come across one of those Greek unique editions, and then I'll be reading from the right hand column. So in essence, we're doing a hybrid reading of the Hebrew and the Greek versions. of this book. As we begin reading, think about Mordecai. Think about the fact that Mordecai in the past saved the king's life. He did not seek credit for it. He just did it because obviously it was the right thing to do. That's going to have an extremely large role in this. Remember, Haman is determined to bring about not only Mordecai's destruction, but that of all of his people, whom he hates because he hates Mordecai that much. Remember that. Let's read. That of all of That night, the king couldn't sleep. So he ordered the records of the daily journal brought, and they were read to the king. It was found written that Mordecai had told about Bigtana and Teresh, two of the king's officers, royal eunuchs, two of the king's officers from the group in charge of the private entryways, who had conspired to assassinate King Achashverosh, the king of Persia. Remember, this is Ahasuerus, this is Artaxerxes. There's many ways of putting his name into translation. The king asked, what honor or distinction was conferred on Mordecai for this? The king's servants answered, nothing was done for him. The king then asked, who's that in the courtyard? For Haman had come into the outer courtyard of the king's palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. The king's servants told him, it's Haman standing there in the courtyard. The king said, have him come in. So Haman came in. The king said to him, what should be done for a man that the king wants to honor? Haman thought to himself, whom would the king want to honor more than me? So Haman answered the king, for a man the king wants to honor, have royal robes brought, which the king himself wears, and the horse the king himself rides, with a royal crown on its head. Interesting, isn't it, that the Greek version, there's no mention of crown. And the Hebrew version, it's not really clear who exactly the crown is for, the horse or the man. Anyway, verse 9, The robes and the horse should be handed over to one of the king's most respected officials, and they should put the robes on the man the king wants to honor and lead him on horseback through the streets of the city, proclaiming ahead of him, "This is what is done for a man whom the king wants to honor." The king said to Haman, "Hurry and take the robes and the horse, as you said, and do this for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Don't leave out anything you mentioned." So Haman took the robes and the horse, dressed Mordecai, and led him riding through the streets of the city, as he proclaimed ahead of him, "This is what is done for a man whom the king wants to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in mourning. After Haman had told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is a Jew, you will not get the better of him. On the contrary, your downfall before him is certain." While they were still talking with him, the king's officials came hurrying to bring Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And the king again said to Esther at the wine banquet, "Whatever your request, Queen Esther, you will be granted it. Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, it will be done." Esther the queen answered, "If I have won your favor, king, and if it pleases the king, then what I ask be given me is my own life and the lives of my people. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, exterminated. If we had only been sold as men and women, slaves, I would have remained quiet, since then our trouble would not have been worth the damage it would have caused the king to alter the situation." King Ahasuerus asked Esther the queen, "Who is he? Where is the man who dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "A ruthless enemy. It's this wicked Haman." Haman stood aghast, terrified before the king and queen. In a rage, the king got up from the wine banquet and went out to the palace garden. But Haman remained and pleading with Esther the queen to spare his life, for he could see that the king had decided to do him in. Haman had just fallen on the couch where Esther was when the king returned from the palace garden to the wine banquet. He shouted, "Is he even going to rape the queen here in the palace before my very eyes?" Whew, that's a little bit more harsh than we're accustomed to hearing, isn't it, as Christians? Interesting that that's how it's put. Is he even going to rape the queen here in the palace before my very eyes? The moment these words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harvona, one of the king's attendants, again, eunuch, uh, Bugathon. Boy, that's quite a difference, isn't it? Harvona, Bugathon. Harvona, one of the king's attendants, said, "Look, the gallows 75 feet high that Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke only good for the king, is standing at Haman's house." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows. The gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsided. We're going to pause there, friends. So we've gone through the pivot. We've gone through the second story, the second banquet, I mean. Haman is now dead. The next chapter will be the undoing of the wickedness of Haman. That'll be the next time that we pick up the book of Esther. Ah, good morning, Audrey. Peace be with you, all of you, now and always.